Hello, and welcome back to Best Sleep History. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Go ahead and settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself relax. Tonight, we're going on a fascinating journey through some of the harshest conditions in human history. We'll discover why surviving just 24 hours in the ancient world would be far more difficult than you might imagine. We'll start with a full day in ancient Rome, experiencing every danger, discomfort, and difficulty an ordinary person faced. Then we'll explore other challenging scenarios: life in a medieval castle under siege, survival on a Viking raid, and the brutal reality of building the pyramids in ancient Egypt. But don't worry, this isn't meant to disturb your sleep. Instead, these stories will help you appreciate the comfort of your own bed, while learning fascinating details about how people actually lived in the past. So take a deep breath, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's step back in time together. Let's begin at 2 a.m. in ancient Rome, in the year 150 CE, during the reign of Emperor Antoninus Pius. You're a typical resident of Rome, living in an insula, a multi-story apartment building in one of the city's crowded neighborhoods. You wake suddenly to shouting in the street below. This is normal. Rome never truly sleeps, and the nights are often louder than the days. You're on the third floor of a 5-story building. Your room is small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, and you share it with your spouse and 2 children. There's barely room for the straw-stuffed mattress you're all sleeping on, a small wooden chest for your belongings, and nothing else. It's cold. It's January, and Rome can get quite chilly in winter. Your room has no heating except for a small charcoal brazier, which you've let burn out because burning it all night risks carbon monoxide poisoning or setting the wooden building on fire. Both happen regularly in Rome. The shouting continues. You get up to peer out the window. Not a glass window, just an opening with wooden shutters. Below, you see a group of drunk men arguing loudly, possibly on the verge of a fight. Here's your first major danger: nighttime violence. Rome after dark is extremely dangerous. There's no police force, no street lighting except for the occasional torch. The only security comes from the vigils, firefighters who also handle some law enforcement. But they can't be everywhere. Gangs of young men from wealthy families sometimes roam the streets looking for trouble, assaulting random people for entertainment. Muggers and thieves operate freely. If you need to go out at night, perhaps to use the public latrine downstairs because your room doesn't have a toilet, you risk being robbed, beaten, or killed. You decide to use the chamber pot in your room instead. It will need to be emptied in the morning, probably by dumping it out the window into the street below. Yes, this is normal. Walking under Roman apartment windows is genuinely hazardous. You try to go back to sleep, but the noise continues. Someone's playing music somewhere. A baby is crying in another apartment. A cart rumbles by. Cargo delivery happens at night because wheeled vehicles are banned during the day to reduce traffic congestion. Sleep in ancient Rome is frequently interrupted. The constant noise is one of the most common complaints in Roman literature. The poet Martial wrote bitter verses about how impossible it is to sleep in Rome, with metalworkers hammering, teachers drilling students, and vendors shouting at all hours. You finally drift back to sleep, only to wake again at 5 a.m. to a different sound, screaming and the smell of smoke. Fire, one of the greatest dangers in ancient Rome. Your building is made mostly of wood, packed with people, filled with oil lamps and cooking fires. Fires are devastatingly common. This one isn't in your building, thank the gods, but it's close. maybe 2 streets over. You can see the orange glow through your window. The vigiles are responding, but Roman firefighting is primitive. They have water pumps and buckets, but often the best they can do is tear down adjacent buildings to create fire breaks and prevent the fire from spreading. You've heard the horror stories. Just decades ago in 64 CE, the Great Fire of Rome burned for 6 days and destroyed 2/3 of the city. Thousands died. Tens of thousands lost their homes. And it's not just fire you need to worry about. These insulae are built cheaply and quickly. They regularly collapse, killing everyone inside. The builders cut corners, using poor materials and flimsy construction. The upper floors are especially dangerous. The higher you live, the more likely the building is to fall down. In fact, there are laws limiting insulae to 5 or 6 stories precisely because taller buildings collapse too often. Not that everyone follows these laws. You live on the 3rd floor, which is a compromise. Not so high that collapse is imminent. Not so low that the street noise and smells are overwhelming. The 1st floor usually houses shops and workshops, noisy and smelly, but at least structurally sound. As the fire across the neighborhood is finally contained, you realize there's no going back to sleep. Dawn is approaching anyway. Time to face the day. As morning light begins to filter through your window, you face one of Rome's daily challenges: getting water. Your apartment building has no running water. None of the insulae do, except perhaps on the ground floor if you're very lucky. To get water, you need to go to the public fountain. You grab a clay amphora, a large jug, and head downstairs. The stairs are narrow, dark, and steep. People regularly fall down these stairs and injure themselves, especially while carrying heavy water jugs. Outside, the street is already busy despite the early hour. You navigate carefully, trying to avoid the filth. Roman streets, especially in poor neighborhoods, are disgusting. They're covered in animal waste from horses and mules, garbage thrown from windows, the contents of emptied chamber pots, mud, and standing water. Rome does have sewers. The famous Cloaca Maxima is an engineering marvel. But the sewers primarily serve public latrines and baths, not the insula. Most of the city's waste ends up in the streets, where it slowly drains away or is trampled underfoot. The smell is overwhelming, especially in summer. In winter, at least the cold reduces the stench somewhat. You reach the public fountain, where a small crowd has already gathered. The fountain is supplied by one of Rome's aqueducts, another engineering marvel. Rome has 11 major aqueducts bringing fresh water from hills miles away. It's one of the city's genuine achievements, but waiting for water takes time. The fountain has only a few spouts, and everyone needs water. You wait your turn, fill your amphora, it's heavy, about 50 pounds when full, and begin the careful journey back. This is a daily chore. Water for drinking, cooking, washing. You'll make this trip multiple times throughout the day. It's exhausting, time-consuming, and dangerous. People are sometimes mugged while carrying water, the jug stolen or broken. Back in your apartment, you use some of the water to wash your face and hands. A full bath is impossible here. For that, you'll need to visit the public baths later, which costs a small fee. By 8 a.m., you're hungry. Romans typically eat a light breakfast if they eat one at all. You have some bread, stale, several days old, but still edible if you dip it in water or wine. Your apartment has no kitchen. There's no way to cook here safely. A few people use small portable braziers for simple cooking, but it's risky. Fire hazard in a wooden building. Most Romans buy prepared food from street vendors or cook outside. You eat your bread with some olives and a bit of cheese, washed down with posca, a drink made from vinegar and water. It sounds unpleasant, but it's actually refreshing and safer than plain water, which can carry disease. Food is expensive in Rome. The city imports vast amounts of grain, distributed free or at subsidized prices to Roman citizens, the famous bread and circuses policy that keeps the population from rioting. But you still need money for everything else. You work as a porter, carrying goods and materials around the city for hire. It's hard physical labor that barely pays enough to feed your family. Your wife works too, spinning wool, and your older child helps when not attending a basic school where she's learning to read and write. But before you can work, you need to navigate another danger: getting through Rome's streets during the day. By mid-morning, Rome is in full chaos. Over 1 million people live in the city, making it one of the largest urban centers in the ancient world. They're all out, all moving, all competing for space in narrow, winding streets. Imagine the density. People shoulder to shoulder. Street vendors shouting, selling food, tools, pottery, cloth. Shops open onto the street, their goods spilling out. Construction projects blocking passage. Religious processions pushing through. Slaves carrying wealthy Romans in litters, forcing everyone else aside. And noise. Constant, overwhelming noise. Metalworkers hammering, merchants haggling, children playing and screaming, dogs barking. The rumble of carts being pulled by hand. Wheeled vehicles are banned during the day, but hand-drawn carts are allowed. You're trying to get to the forum where you hope to find work, but the journey that should take 20 minutes will probably take an hour because of the crowds, and you need to be constantly vigilant. Pickpockets work the crowds. Cut purses use small knives to slice money pouches from belts. Scam artists run elaborate cons. If you look distracted or wealthy, though you're clearly not wealthy, you're a target. There's also the constant risk of being hit by things thrown or dropped from upper windows. We already mentioned chamber pots, but people also throw garbage, broken pottery, anything they don't want. There's a saying in Rome: it's as dangerous to walk under windows as it is to walk through a battle. You keep your head up, stay alert, and finally reach the Forum. The Forum is the heart of Rome, a vast open space surrounded by temples, government buildings, and markets. It's packed with people. Businessmen making deals, politicians giving speeches, priests performing rituals, tourists gawking, and workers like you, hoping to find employment for the day. You're hired by a merchant to help unload a wagon of amphorae filled with olive oil from Spain. The work is brutal. Each amphora weighs about 75 pounds. You'll carry dozens of them from the wagon to the warehouse, walking upstairs, being careful not to drop any because you'll have to pay for anything you break. The merchant pays poorly, just enough for a basic meal and a little extra. But you need the work, so you don't complain. Complaining might mean not being hired next time. As the morning progresses toward midday, the heat becomes oppressive. Even in winter, physical labor under the Mediterranean sun is exhausting. In summer, it's dangerous. Heat stroke is a real risk. Workers regularly collapse and sometimes die from heat exhaustion. There's no concept of worker safety or labor rights. If you're injured on the job, that's your problem. If you die, your family gets nothing except perhaps your body to bury, if they can afford burial. You work through the worst of the midday heat because you need the money, but you're allowed a brief break to rest in the shade and drink some water. The merchant isn't generous. He just doesn't want you dying before the work is done. After a few hours of grueling labor, you're feeling unwell. Your head hurts, your stomach is upset, and you're developing what might be a fever. This is extremely dangerous. Disease is one of the greatest killers in ancient Rome. Life expectancy is around 25 to 30 years, though if you survive childhood, you might live into your 50s or 60s. But many don't survive childhood, and disease claims adults regularly too. The Romans don't understand germ theory. They don't know about bacteria or viruses. They have some good medical practices. They understand the importance of cleanliness and public health infrastructure. But they can't treat most diseases effectively. Common ailments that we'd consider minor can be fatal. An infected cut can lead to sepsis and death. Dysentery from contaminated water kills thousands. Malaria is endemic in marshy areas around Rome. Tuberculosis, typhoid, smallpox, all are common and often deadly. The water and food you consumed earlier might be contaminated. Street food vendors don't have refrigeration or modern hygiene standards. Food poisoning is common. Parasitic infections are nearly universal. Intestinal worms, for example, are found in almost everyone. You feel dizzy and nauseous, but you keep working because stopping means not getting paid. The merchant notices you're slowing down and threatens to dock your wages if you don't speed up. This is survival in ancient Rome. You're always one illness, one injury, one mishap away from disaster. There's no safety net, no unemployment benefits, no health insurance. If you can't work, you don't eat. If your illness is serious, you might die. The work is finally finished. You've earned your day's wage, a few copper coins. You're exhausted, filthy, and still feeling unwell, but you decide to visit the public baths before heading home. The baths are one of Rome's genuinely good features. For a small fee, anyone can enter and bathe. There are multiple pools of different temperatures, exercise areas, massage services, even libraries in some bath complexes. You pay your quadrans, the smallest coin, and enter. First, the changing room, where you strip and leave your clothes with an attendant. Theft is common here, even with attendants watching, so you didn't bring anything valuable. The bathing ritual follows a specific sequence. First, exercise or sports in the palestra. You're too exhausted for this. Then the warm room to begin sweating. Then the hot room, where intense heat makes you sweat profusely. An attendant scrapes your skin with a strigil, a curved metal tool, removing the sweat, oil, and dirt. There's no soap as we know it. Romans use olive oil and scraping. Finally, a plunge in the cold pool. The shock of cold water after the heat is invigorating, and you feel somewhat better, though your head still aches. But the baths also expose you to social hierarchies and potential humiliation. Wealthy Romans have private baths in their homes and only visit public baths for socializing. When they're here, they're attended by slaves who wash them, massage them, and cater to every need. You have no slaves. You scrape yourself or pay a few coins for an attendant to do it. You're clearly poor, and wealthier bathers sometimes make comments or jokes at your expense. The social hierarchy is always visible, always reinforced. The baths are also a place where sexual activity happens, both consensual and coercive. The Romans have different attitudes towards sexuality than modern people, and the baths can be venues for prostitution, harassment, and assault. You keep to yourself, finish bathing, dress, and leave. It's late afternoon, and you're starving. You haven't eaten since your meager breakfast. You use some of your day's wages to buy food from a thermopolium, a fast food shop that sells hot prepared meals. The food is basic, a bowl of porridge made from grain, with a bit of vegetable, and maybe a tiny amount of meat. It's not delicious, but it's filling and warm. You eat standing at the counter because sitting costs extra. Roman diet for the poor is monotonous. Grain, grain, and more grain, usually wheat or barley, made into bread or porridge. Occasionally beans, lentils, or chickpeas. Vegetables when available and affordable. Cabbage, onions, turnips. Meat is rare and expensive. Fish is more common but still a luxury for people like you. The wealthy eat elaborately. Multiple courses, exotic ingredients, imported delicacies. They have private dinner parties with entertainment, reclining on couches, attended by slaves. This is completely out of reach for you. You're always hungry. The food you can afford provides enough calories to survive and work, but not much more. Malnutrition is common among Rome's poor. You're shorter and weaker than you would be with better nutrition. Your teeth are bad. Abscesses and decay are common. Dental care barely exists. Watching wealthy Romans pass by in their fine clothes, well-fed and comfortable, while you're constantly struggling, creates resentment. But there's nothing you can do about it. Social mobility barely exists. You were born poor, and you'll die poor, and your children will likely be poor too. As evening approaches, you head home. Your wages today were enough to buy food and pay tomorrow's rent, with a tiny bit left over. If you'd been unable to work, or if you'd been injured or robbed, your family would have been in serious trouble. The walk home is dangerous again as darkness falls. You stay on busier streets, where there's more activity and safety in numbers. You keep your remaining coins hidden and your head down. Back at your insula, you climb the dark, treacherous stairs to your third-floor room. Your family is there. Your wife has been working all day too, and your children have been out playing or helping with small tasks. Your wife has managed to get a small amount of food, bread, and some vegetables. Combined with what you brought, it's enough for a meal, though no one will go to bed full. You eat together in your cramped room by the light of an oil lamp. The children are loud and energetic despite the sparse meal. Your wife mentions that the landlord came by demanding next week's rent in advance. This is a problem. You don't have next week's rent in advance. You barely have tomorrow's rent. This constant financial insecurity is exhausting. You're always one problem away from eviction, from homelessness. And homelessness in Rome is essentially a death sentence. The streets are too dangerous to sleep on. You'd have no shelter from weather, no protection from violence. Your headache has worsened, and you're definitely running a fever. Your wife looks worried, but there's nothing to be done. You can't afford a doctor. You'll either get better on your own, or you won't. Many people don't. By 9 p.m., you're exhausted and desperately need sleep. Your body aches from the day's labor. Your illness is getting worse. Chills, nausea, body aches. But sleep is difficult. The building is noisy. Someone upstairs is arguing loudly. Someone else is singing drunkenly. A baby is crying. Outside, the night commerce has begun. Carts delivering goods, vendors setting up for the night market, all creating noise. Your room is cold. You huddle under thin blankets with your family, sharing body heat. The charcoal brazier is unlit because you can't afford to buy charcoal every night, and the fire risk is too great. You're also worried. Worried about tomorrow, worried about rent, worried about your illness, worried about your family. Worried about the building collapsing or catching fire. Worried about crime. The stress is constant and crushing. This is life in ancient Rome for the majority of people. Not the Rome of movies and TV shows, with marble temples and noble senators. This is the real Rome. Crowded, dirty, dangerous, exhausting, and precarious. You wouldn't last 24 hours, not because you're weak, but because survival in ancient Rome required a level of hardiness, constant vigilance, and sheer endurance that modern people simply haven't developed. You'd be unprepared for the danger, the disease, the physical hardship, the lack of safety and security that we take for granted. As midnight approaches, you finally drift into fitful sleep, knowing that in just a few hours, you'll wake to face it all again. The noise, the danger, the hunger, the struggle. This is your life. This is Rome. And this is why, despite its achievements, its aqueducts, its baths, its architecture, its literature, ancient Rome was a place where most people lived hard, short, difficult lives. Now let's shift forward in time to the year 1215 in England during the Barons' War. You're a common soldier garrisoned at a mid-sized castle in the countryside. For months, things have been tense. King John's conflict with his barons has turned violent, and your castle's lord has sided with the rebellious barons. 3 days ago, a messenger arrived with terrible news. A royal army is marching toward your castle. They'll be here soon. The castle is preparing for siege. If you think sieges are dramatic battles with heroic charges and glorious combat, you're wrong. Sieges are slow, grinding, horrific tests of endurance. Most people who die in sieges don't die in combat. They die from starvation, disease, or accidents. Let me show you why you wouldn't survive. The royal army arrives in the morning. From the battlements, you watch them set up camp about 500 yards from the castle walls. There are perhaps 400 men, soldiers, knights, engineers, and laborers. Your castle garrison numbers about 80 fighting men, plus another 100 or so non-combatants, servants, craftsmen, women, children. The castle also houses about 50 local peasants who fled here seeking protection when they heard the army was coming. The castle feels strong. It has thick stone walls, towers, a gatehouse, a moat. Supplies have been gathered: grain, salted meat, barrels of wine and beer. The well inside the bailey provides water. You feel relatively secure. This confidence won't last long. The castle commander addresses everyone. The siege could last weeks or months. Rations will be strictly controlled. No one leaves. No unauthorized fires. Everyone has duties: guards, lookouts, maintenance, kitchen work. You're assigned to wall duty, watching the enemy camp and ready to sound the alarm if they attack. It seems simple enough. 2 days into the siege, the reality is already grim. The enemy has completely surrounded the castle. No one can enter or leave. You're cut off from the outside world, and you'll remain cut off for as long as the siege lasts. Food rationing has begun. Each person receives a small daily portion of bread, a bit of cheese or meat, and weak ale. It's not enough to feel full, but it's calculated to keep everyone alive as long as possible. The latrines are already becoming a problem. The castle has guardrobe, toilet chutes that drop waste into the moat or pits below. But with 230 people confined here, the waste is accumulating faster than it can decompose. The smell is getting bad, and it will only get worse. Water is secure for now. The well is deep and reliable, but everyone must ration it carefully, because who knows how long this will last. You're also discovering that life on the walls is exhausting. You stand watch for 4 hours at a time, exposed to weather. It's March, cold and rainy. You're supposed to sleep between watches, but sleep is difficult. The castle is crowded and noisy. People are scared and tensions are high. A week into the siege, the enemy makes their first serious move. They've built a siege tower, a tall wooden structure on wheels that can be rolled up to the walls, allowing attackers to fight defenders at wall height. The attack comes at dawn. You're on the wall when you see the tower being pushed towards you, dozens of men behind large shields pushing it forward. Archers on your side start shooting. The enemy archers shoot back. Arrows are flying everywhere. You duck behind a merlon, the raised part of the battlement. But you know arrows can still find you. The siege. Tower gets closer. It's covered in wet hides to prevent fire. Your side tries anyway, shooting fire arrows. Some catch, but the tower keeps coming. When it reaches the wall, a drawbridge drops from the tower onto the battlement. Enemy soldiers pour across. This is your first real combat, and it's terrifying. Men are screaming, dying. Blood is everywhere. The fighting is chaotic and desperate. You survive only because other, more experienced soldiers hold the line. After brutal close combat, the attackers are pushed back. The tower is pulled away. The attack has failed, but the cost is high. 5 of your garrison are dead, 12 more wounded, some seriously. That's about 20% of your fighting force gone in one morning. And this is just the beginning. 2 weeks in, and disease is spreading through the castle. With 230 people crammed into a confined space, sharing latrines, washing rarely, eating marginal food, illness is inevitable. Dysentery has broken out. Bloody diarrhea caused by contaminated food or water. Several people are seriously ill. The castle has no real medical care. There's a woman who knows some herbal remedies, and the priest says prayers. But that's it. People with dysentery either recover on their own or die, usually from dehydration. 3 people have died so far from illness. More are sick, and dysentery spreads easily in these conditions. You're terrified you'll catch it. The smell in the castle is now overwhelming. Waste, unwashed bodies, sickness, death. You try not to think about it, but there's no escaping it. Food supplies are dwindling faster than expected. The castle commander reduces rations again. You're hungry all the time now. The constant hunger makes it hard to think, hard to stay alert during your watch. Morale is dropping. People argue over petty things. Fights break out. The Lord has to threaten punishment to maintain order. 3 weeks in, the enemy changes tactics. They're no longer attacking. Instead, they're simply waiting. They know what you're only beginning to realize. Time is on their side. Your rations have been cut again. You're now receiving about half the calories you need. You're constantly hungry, constantly tired. The weight is falling off you. The horses are being slaughtered for food. There's no feed for them anyway, and their meat will extend the food supply. Watching the horses being killed is disturbing, but you're hungry enough that you don't refuse the meat when it's distributed. More people are sick. Dysentery continues to spread. A few people are now showing signs of typhus, likely transmitted by lice. Everyone has lice. There's no way to avoid them in these crowded, unsanitary conditions. The well water is starting to taste strange. You don't know why, but it's slightly discolored and has an off smell. People are getting sick from the water now, which is terrifying because if the water supply fails, the castle must surrender immediately. You later learn what happened. A dead animal, maybe a rat, fell into the well and has been decomposing there. The water is contaminated, but there's no choice but to keep drinking it. 5 weeks into the siege, you're at your breaking point. You've lost about 25 pounds. You're weak, dizzy, and apathetic. The constant hunger has moved beyond discomfort into a kind of mental fog where you can barely think about anything except food. More people are dying from disease than from combat. The castle has lost perhaps 40 people total, about 15% of those who were here when the siege began. Bodies are being buried in the bailey because there's nowhere else to put them. The social order is breaking down. Some people are hoarding food, stealing from rations. The Lord has authorized flogging as punishment, but it's hard to maintain discipline when everyone is starving and desperate. There's talk of surrender. The castle can't hold out much longer, but the Lord refuses, hoping for relief, an allied army that might come to break the siege. But no relief comes. You spend your watches staring at the enemy camp, seeing them sitting around fires, cooking food. The smell of their cooking drifts to the castle, torture to your empty stomach. 6 weeks into the siege, it's over. The well has finally failed completely. The water is undrinkable, and people are dying from waterborne illness. Without water, there's no choice. The castle lord negotiates surrender. The terms are actually relatively generous. The garrison will be allowed to leave alive, disarmed but unharmed. The lord will forfeit his castle and lands, but keep his life. When the gates finally open and you walk out, you're shocked by how weak you've become. The short walk to the enemy camp exhausts you. You can barely stand. The enemy soldiers stare at you. You're skeletal, filthy, covered in lice, probably diseased. You look like a walking corpse. You wouldn't have survived another week. The siege lasted 42 days, but many medieval sieges lasted months or even years. You made it 6 weeks and barely survived. A longer siege would have killed you through starvation, disease, or psychological collapse. This is the reality of medieval siege warfare. Not glorious, not heroic, just slow, grinding, inevitable suffering until someone breaks. It's the year 875 CE, and you're a Viking warrior from a village in Norway. Your Jarl, your lord, has announced a raid on the coast of England. Raiding is how Vikings make their living, acquire wealth, and gain honor. You've been chosen to join the crew. You think you're ready. You've trained with weapons. You've been on one previous raid that was successful and relatively easy. You're young, strong, confident. But this raid will be different. This raid will show you just how brutal and dangerous Viking raiding actually was. And you probably won't survive it. The longship departs with 30 warriors aboard. It's a beautiful vessel, sleek, fast, shallow drafted, so it can navigate rivers and land on beaches. The dragonhead prow is meant to frighten enemies and honor the gods. The voyage to England will take several days, and the first thing you realize is how uncomfortable a longship is for long voyages. There's no shelter, no cabin. Everyone sits on sea chests or rowing benches, exposed to wind, spray, and weather. If it rains, you get wet and stay wet. There's no way to dry off. At night, when conditions allow, the ship anchors near shore and everyone camps on the beach. But if weather is bad or the coast is hostile, you sleep on the ship, cramped and cold. Food is basic. Dried fish, hard bread, water. No cooking is possible on the ship except on calm days when a fire can be lit in a sand-filled box. You're hungry and cold most of the time. And the sea is dangerous. Storms can sink ships. Several Viking ships are lost every year to weather. The ocean is enormous and uncaring, and your ship is small and fragile. You're already exhausted, and the raid hasn't even begun. After 4 days at sea, you reach the English coast at dawn. The plan is to raid a monastery. Monasteries are prime targets because they hold treasure, and the monks don't fight back. The ship slides onto the beach. Everyone leaps out, grabbing weapons. You have a spear, an axe, and a small wooden shield. Most Vikings can't afford swords. They're expensive and rare. The monastery is about a mile inland. Your group moves quickly and quietly, trying to achieve surprise. Speed is essential in raiding. Get in, take what you can. Get out before armed resistance can organize. You reach the monastery at sunrise. The monks are at prayer. Your group crashes through the wooden gate screaming, trying to terrify them into submission. Most monks flee or surrender immediately. A few try to resist with improvised weapons, tools, staffs. They're killed quickly and brutally. You're shocked by how easy it is to kill an unarmed man, and also by how sick it makes you feel afterwards. The looting begins. Silver candlesticks, golden crosses, jeweled reliquaries, everything valuable is grabbed. The monastery's grain stores are also taken. Food is as valuable as treasure. Some of your companions want to burn the monastery. Others argue against it. A burned monastery can't be raided again in the future. The argument is settled when a guard shouts a warning. Armed men are approaching. A local lord has rallied his men, perhaps 15 warriors, armored and mounted. They're charging toward your position. Your group forms a shield wall, a defensive formation where overlapping shields create a barrier. You've trained for this, but actually doing it in combat is different. The mounted warriors crash into your line. The impact is tremendous. Men are knocked down. The shield wall buckles but holds. Fighting is chaotic and terrifying. A spear thrust at you. You deflect it with your shield, but the force numbs your arm. Someone next to you screams and falls, blood pouring from a wound. You thrust your own, spear at a horse, striking its shoulder. The horse rears and throws its rider. Another Viking kills the fallen warrior while he's trying to stand. The melee lasts maybe 5 minutes, though it feels like hours. The local warriors are better equipped and trained, but you outnumber them and you're fighting desperately. Eventually, they break and flee. Your group has lost 4 men dead and several wounded. That's about 13% casualties in a single brief fight. The treasure is still worth it, but the cost is high. Getting back to the ship is harder than the approach. You're carrying heavy loot, silver candlesticks, golden items, sacks of grain. The wounded are being helped or carried, and the local lord will be gathering more men to pursue you. You're exhausted from the fight, the adrenaline crash leaving you shaky and weak. One of your friends from the village is among the dead. You helped carry his body back because leaving the dead behind would dishonor them. The ship is loaded quickly. The dead are laid in the vessel. They'll be buried at sea with honor. The wounded are made as comfortable as possible, though several are in bad shape. One man has a deep sword cut to his belly. You know he won't survive the journey home. The ship pushes off just as a larger force of English warriors arrives at the beach. Arrows fly. One strikes the man rowing next to you in the shoulder. He screams, but keeps rowing. If the ship is caught now, everyone will die. The ship makes it to open water. The immediate danger is past, but the voyage home will be long and difficult. 2 days into the return voyage, a storm hits. This is what you've heard stories about, what you feared. The sea turns violent. Waves tower above the ship. Wind tears at the sail. Rain lashes down so hard you can barely see. Everyone who can rows, fighting to keep the ship's nose into the waves. If the ship turns broadside to a wave, it will capsize and sink, drowning everyone. The wounded man with the belly injury dies during the storm. His body is wrapped and committed to the sea with quick prayers. There's no time for a proper ceremony. Another man is washed overboard by a wave. He disappears into the churning water, gone in an instant. There's no possibility of rescue. The ship can't turn around in these conditions. You row until your hands bleed, until your arms feel like they'll fall off, until you're so exhausted you can barely lift the oar. But you can't stop. If everyone doesn't keep rowing, the ship will founder. The storm lasts 18 hours. By the time it passes, everyone is utterly exhausted, hypothermic from constant exposure to cold water, and traumatized. 3 more men have died, 2 washed overboard, 1 from exhaustion and exposure. Of the 30 who left Norway, you're now down to 23, a casualty rate of 23%, and you haven't even made it home yet. When the ship finally reaches home, the village turns out to greet you. The raid was successful. You have silver, gold, grain. The Jarl is pleased. There will be feasting and celebration. But 7 men didn't return. 7 families have lost fathers, brothers, sons. The treasure will be divided among the survivors and the families of the dead, but no amount of silver replaces a loved one. You're also changed. You've killed men. You've watched friends die. You've faced death multiple times. You're only 22 years old, but you feel ancient. The feast is held, and everyone drinks and boasts of their deeds. But later, alone, you vomit from stress and horror at what you experienced. The nightmares start that night and continue for weeks. You wouldn't have survived a Viking raid not because you're weak, but because Viking raiding was brutal, dangerous, and traumatizing in ways that modern people can't fully comprehend. The combination of sea voyage dangers, combat, weather, and the psychological toll was immense. Many Vikings didn't survive to old age. They died in raids, in storms, from wounds that became infected, or from the accumulated trauma of years of violence. The ones who survived were extraordinarily tough, or extraordinarily lucky, or both. Let's be clear about something. The Viking Age lasted only about 300 years. It ended partly because it was unsustainable. The constant raiding made enemies everywhere. Eventually, European kingdoms organized effective defenses. Fortified towns, standing armies, and naval forces made raiding much more difficult and dangerous. The Vikings themselves were taking heavy casualties. Every raid lost men. Every storm sank ships. The population couldn't sustain the losses indefinitely. And the psychological toll was real. Many warriors who survived multiple raids were probably dealing with what we'd now call PTSD, nightmares, anxiety, difficulty readjusting to normal life. When Christianity spread through Scandinavia, it offered an alternative to the warrior culture. Farming, trading, settling in peaceful communities became more appealing than constant raiding and violence. The Viking Age ended not with a dramatic final battle, but with a gradual cultural shift away from raiding toward more sustainable ways of life. You wouldn't have lasted as a Viking because very few people could sustain that lifestyle for long. It required too much courage, too much hardship, too much violence, too much loss. Now let's travel back even further, to ancient Egypt around 2500 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. You're a farmer from a village in the Nile Delta. The flood season has arrived, covering your fields with water. This means you can't farm for the next 4 months. The pharaoh's officials arrive in your village. They're recruiting workers for the Great Pyramid at Giza. This isn't slavery. It's a labor obligation, a form of taxation. Every able-bodied man owes the pharaoh a period of work. You and about 50 other men from your village are selected. You'll travel to Giza, work on the pyramid for the flood season, then return home when the waters recede and farming can resume. You think this will be an adventure, a chance to see the capital, to be part of something great. You have no idea how brutal the next 4 months will be. The journey to Giza takes a week. You walk, carrying your few possessions, a reed mat to sleep on, a change of linen clothing, a small knife. Food is provided by the officials, but it's basic. Bread and beer, occasionally some onions or dried fish. By the time you arrive at Giza, your feet are blistered and bleeding. You're exhausted from walking 15 miles a day in sandals on rough roads under the blazing sun. And you haven't even started the actual work yet. You're assigned to a barracks in the workers' village. This is a permanent settlement, housing perhaps 4,000 workers at any given time, plus support staff. Bakers, brewers, doctors, priests, administrators. The barracks is a long, mud brick building with small rooms. You share a room about 8 feet by 10 feet with 3 other men. There's barely space for the reed mats you sleep on. The village is organized and efficient. There are bakeries producing thousands of loaves daily, breweries making vast quantities of beer, a butchery slaughtering cattle, a medical facility for treating injuries. You receive your work assignment, hauling stone blocks from the quarry to the pyramid. This is among the hardest jobs on the site. Your daily rations are distributed: 10 loaves of bread, several onions, a portion of beer. This is actually a substantial ration, more than you'd normally eat as a farmer. The pharaoh needs workers strong enough for heavy labor, so he feeds you well. But you'll need every bit of that food for the work ahead. Your first day of work begins before dawn. You're assigned to a work gang of 20 men. Your overseer, not a slave driver with a whip, but an experienced foreman, explains the task. You'll be moving limestone blocks from the quarry to the pyramid, a distance of about half a mile. Each block weighs roughly 2.5 tons, 5,000 pounds. Your gang will use wooden sledges and rope to haul them. The blocks are loaded onto sledges using levers and ramps. Then your gang takes position with the ropes. Someone pours water on the sand in front of the sledge. Wet sand reduces friction significantly. At the overseer's signal, you all pull. The sledge moves, but barely. It takes enormous effort to get it moving and keep it moving. You're pulling with all your strength, back bent, legs straining, while the sun beats down mercilessly. The work is rhythmic. The overseer calls out timing. Everyone pulls together. Pull, rest, pull, rest. Slowly, incrementally, the sledge moves forward. You make the journey 4 times that first day. 4 blocks moved. By the end of the day, your hands are raw and bleeding despite the calluses you have from farm work. Your back aches. Your legs shake with exhaustion. You collapse in your barracks room and fall asleep immediately, too tired even to eat dinner. By the second week, you're starting to adjust physically. Your hands have developed new calluses. Your muscles have adapted somewhat to the constant strain. But new problems are emerging. One of your roommates has suffered a serious injury. While moving a block, the sledge shifted suddenly, and his foot was crushed beneath it. Several bones are broken. He's been taken to the medical facility, where physicians will set the bones and wrap his foot in linen soaked in tree resin, a primitive cast. He won't work for weeks, maybe months. But here's what's remarkable. He'll receive care. The medical facility has physicians trained in setting bones, treating wounds, and managing pain with willow bark, which contains salicin, the precursor to aspirin. He'll continue receiving food rations while he recovers. This isn't cruelty. It's pragmatic. The pharaoh has invested in recruiting, transporting, housing, and feeding these workers. Letting them die or suffer without care would be wasteful, but that doesn't make the work any less brutal. The heat is becoming unbearable as summer progresses. Working in the sun, doing heavy labor, you're always on the edge of heat exhaustion. You drink enormous quantities of water and beer. You need it to replace the fluids lost through sweat. Several workers collapse from heat stroke. One dies despite the physician's efforts. The work continues. After a month, your gang is reassigned. Instead of hauling blocks from the quarry to the pyramid base, you're now hauling them up the ramp. The pyramid is about 200 feet tall now and still growing. To get blocks to the top, there's a massive mud brick ramp that spirals up the pyramid's side. As the pyramid grows taller, the ramp is extended and raised. Hauling blocks up this ramp is significantly harder than hauling them on flat ground. The incline means you're fighting gravity. The ramp is narrow. If something goes wrong, there's nowhere to go. And things do go wrong. Ropes break under the strain. Sledges slip. Blocks shift. During your second week on the ramp, disaster strikes. A rope on the sledge behind yours breaks. The block slides backward down the ramp. Workers scatter, but not everyone is fast enough. 2 men are crushed to death. Several others are injured. Work stops for an hour while the bodies are removed and the injured are treated. Then it resumes. The pyramid must be built. The pharaoh's eternal resting place cannot wait. You're traumatized by what you've seen, but you can't stop. You keep pulling, keep climbing, keep working. 2 months in, dysentery breaks out in the workers' village. With 4,000 people living in close quarters, sharing latrines and water sources, disease spreads quickly. You're lucky you don't catch it, but many do. The disease causes severe diarrhea and dehydration. Without modern medicine, all the physicians can do is try to keep patients hydrated and hope they recover. Some do, some don't. The village cemetery grows. The work continues despite the illness. Workers who are too sick to haul stones are assigned lighter duties if they can stand. Those who can't work at all stay in their barracks, cared for by medical staff, and hope to recover. The constant exposure to death and suffering is wearing on everyone's morale. You're all far from home, doing brutally hard work, watching friends and colleagues die from accidents and disease. You start to understand something. This pyramid is being built with blood and suffering, not the blood of slaves being whipped. That's a myth. But the blood of ordinary people like you, doing extraordinary labor at great personal cost. 3 months in, you're at your breaking point mentally and physically. You've lost weight despite the good rations because you're burning more calories than you're consuming. Your body is covered in bruises, cuts, and scar tissue. Your hands are permanently damaged, fingers that don't quite straighten anymore, permanent calluses thick as leather. You've witnessed 4 deaths in your work gang. You've seen dozens more injuries. You're constantly tired, constantly in pain, constantly stressed. The psychological toll is severe. You have nightmares about stones falling, about being crushed. During work, you're hypervigilant, constantly watching for danger. The stress is exhausting. You count the days until the flood waters recede and you can go home. Just one more month. You can survive one more month. Finally, after 4 months, your service is complete. The flood waters are receding. It's time to return to your village and resume farming. You've survived. Many didn't. Of the 50 men who came from your village, 46 are returning. 4 died, 2 in accidents, 2 from disease. Several more are seriously injured and may never fully recover. You receive payment for your labor, a small amount of grain and beer to take home, and the knowledge that you've fulfilled your obligation to the pharaoh. No money, because the Egyptian economy doesn't really use money yet. But you won't owe pyramid labor again for several years. The journey home is difficult. You're exhausted, injured, and traumatized. But you're going home, back to your family, back to farming. Hard work, but nothing like what you've just endured. You wouldn't have survived building the pyramids for several reasons. First, the sheer physical demands. Moving multi-ton stone blocks in intense heat for 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for 4 months straight, would break most modern people physically. You're not conditioned for that level of labor. Second, the constant danger. Every day brought risks: stones shifting, ropes breaking, heat exhaustion, falls from heights. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and you could be dead or crippled. Third, the disease environment. Living in close quarters with thousands of others, sharing primitive sanitation, drinking water that might be contaminated, you'd likely catch dysentery. And without moderns, medicine, you might not survive it. Fourth, the psychological toll. Watching people die, working despite injuries and exhaustion, being far from home with no ability to leave, the stress would be overwhelming. The ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids were incredibly tough. They'd lived their entire lives doing hard physical labor, dealing with danger, enduring hardship. They had no alternative. This was their world, and they were adapted to it. You're not adapted to it. You're adapted to climate control, abundant food, modern medicine, safety regulations, and work that doesn't routinely kill or maim people. Dropped into ancient Egypt, assigned to pyramid construction, you'd struggle to survive. The work would injure you. The environment would sicken you. And the accumulated stress and trauma would break you mentally. The pyramids are testaments to human achievement, yes, but they're also monuments to human suffering. Thousands of people doing brutal work at great personal cost to build eternal tombs for god kings. Now that we've explored 4 different scenarios, a day in ancient Rome, a medieval siege, a Viking raid, and pyramid construction, let's step back and understand what connects them all. In each scenario, survival required a combination of physical toughness, mental resilience, social support, and sheer luck that most modern people simply don't possess. Not because we're weak, but because we haven't had to develop these traits. Ancient people were physically harder than us in almost every measurable way. They had stronger bones from a lifetime of weight-bearing activity. Their muscles were denser from constant manual labor. Their cardiovascular systems were more efficient from walking everywhere. But they also had higher pain tolerance. When you live with chronic discomfort, hunger, cold, injuries that never quite heal, dental problems, parasitic infections, you develop the ability to function despite pain. You have to because there's no alternative. Modern people, used to immediate pain relief from medications, ergonomic furniture, and climate control, would struggle to function in an environment of constant physical discomfort. Ancient people also had different immune systems. They'd been exposed to pathogens from childhood, building immunity to local diseases. Modern people, with our sanitized environments and antibiotics, haven't developed that resistance. Diseases that ancient people could survive would kill modern visitors. The psychological demands of ancient life were immense and unrelenting. You had to live with constant insecurity. No safety net, no insurance, no police protection, no guarantee of tomorrow's meal. The stress of this constant precariousness would be mentally overwhelming for most modern people. You also had to live with violence and death as routine parts of life. Children died frequently. About 30 to 40% didn't survive to age 5. Adults died from accidents, disease, childbirth, violence. You'd witness death regularly, lose family members and friends frequently. This doesn't mean ancient people didn't grieve or feel pain. They did, but they had to develop the ability to grieve and keep functioning, because survival didn't allow for extended mourning. Modern people, especially in developed countries, are sheltered from death and violence. We have the luxury of being traumatized by what ancient people considered normal. Dropped into an environment where death is common and expected, many of us would be psychologically overwhelmed. Ancient people relied heavily on social networks for survival. Your family, your neighbors, your community. These relationships were literally life and death. If you were injured and couldn't work, your family and neighbors might help you until you recovered. If your crops failed, you might receive food from relatives. If you faced violence, your community might protect you. But these social bonds required maintenance. You had to contribute to the community, fulfill obligations, maintain your reputation. Being excluded from your social network could be a death sentence. Modern people, used to individualism and institutional support systems, often lack the social skills to build and maintain these tight community bonds. We don't need them the same way, but in the ancient world, you'd need them desperately. Ancient people had practical knowledge and skills that most modern people lack completely. They could make fire from scratch, butcher and preserve meat, repair tools and clothing, navigate without maps or compasses, recognize edible plants, predict weather by observing nature, treat basic injuries and illnesses with available materials. These weren't special skills. They were basic competencies that everyone needed. A person who couldn't do these things would be a burden on their community. Modern people, dependent on technology and specialization, mostly lack these skills. Dropped into an ancient environment, you wouldn't know how to do the basic things needed to survive. You'd be helpless in ways that would astonish ancient people. Here's something crucial. Ancient people who survived to adulthood were pre-selected for toughness. About 30 to 40% of children died before age 5. Those who survived were, on average, healthier and stronger than the general population. Then, harsh conditions continued to select for toughness throughout life. Weak individuals died from disease, accidents, or hardship. Survivors tended to be exceptionally resilient. Modern people haven't been through this selection process. Medical care keeps alive people who would have died in infancy or childhood in ancient times. This is wonderful and humane, but it means that average modern people are physically more fragile than average ancient adults. Understanding why you wouldn't survive in the ancient world isn't about romanticizing the past or criticizing the present. It's about developing realistic appreciation for two things. First, how hard life was for most of human history. The comfort, safety, and security we take for granted are extraordinary achievements, not the natural state of human existence. Second, how tough our ancestors were. The people who survived and thrived in these harsh conditions weren't superhuman. They were ordinary people adapting to their environment. But their adaptations made them capable of enduring things that would break most of us. When you curl up in your warm bed tonight, in your secure home, with food in your refrigerator and medicine in your cabinet, you're experiencing a level of comfort and security that kings couldn't achieve for most of human history. And that's something worth appreciating as you drift off to sleep. And so, after more than 3 hours together, we've completed our journey through some of the harshest experiences in human history. We've experienced 24 hours in ancient Rome, navigating constant danger, disease, hunger, and insecurity. We've endured a medieval siege, slowly starving and sickening in a confined space. We've survived a Viking raid, facing combat, storms, and the psychological toll of violence. And we've labored on the pyramids, moving massive stones under the blazing sun, watching friends die from accidents and disease. Through it all, one truth emerges. Survival in the ancient world required a level of physical toughness, mental resilience, practical skill, and sheer endurance that most modern people simply don't possess. Not because we're weaker, but because we haven't needed to develop these qualities. Our ancestors lived hard lives. They endured things we can barely imagine. They buried their children, survived diseases that would kill us, worked until their bodies broke, and somehow kept going. But they also knew joys we might not fully appreciate. The joy of a meal when you're truly hungry. The relief of shelter when you've been exposed to harsh weather. The preciousness of family when you know how fragile life is. The satisfaction of surviving another day when survival isn't guaranteed. We live in an unprecedented era of human history. We have comforts, security, and opportunities our ancestors couldn't dream of. We can pursue happiness, self-fulfillment, and meaning because we're not constantly fighting for basic survival. This doesn't make us better than our ancestors. It makes us luckier. We stand on foundations they built through their suffering and endurance. As you drift off to sleep tonight, in comfort and safety, remember the countless humans across history who worked, struggled, suffered, and survived, so that eventually, thousands of years later, you could have this moment of peace. You're part of that same human story. You're connected to those ancient Romans, medieval soldiers, Viking raiders, and pyramid builders through an unbroken chain of survival and perseverance. Sleep well, knowing that you're the inheritor of thousands of generations of human toughness, ingenuity, and determination. And be grateful that you live in a time when you don't need to use all of that inherited strength just to survive a single day. Good night, and thank you for spending these hours with me, exploring the challenging, brutal, and ultimately deeply human world of history. Sweet dreams.